this looks like a good spot over here. Let's check this out. Yeah, this will do just fine right here. Hey everybody, Backpack Hack here, coming at you with another trail tip. Today I'm going to be talking about the basics of setting up your campsite. Primarily the orientation and placement of your tent, but there's going to be a lot more to it than just setting up your tent. There's so many different styles and types of tents. I won't get into actually how to set up your tent. I'm going to be talking about how to pick your spot, orienting and placing your tent, as well as your campsite in general. So let's get the pack off, get the tent out, and get started. Now, before you even start setting up your tent, there's a few things you need to do. And it doesn't begin here at your campsite. It actually begins back at home. And here's what I mean. Before you hit the trail, you want to set up your tent in your backyard if it's brand new, or some other place like a campground or a friend's or a neighbor's place. Always check your tent out. New or used, you want to check it out. If it's new, you want to make sure that you're comfortable with setting it up. Make sure that all the parts are there, all the poles, everything that comes with the tent and that you purchase as an accessory to the tent is actually in your possession as well as being functional. So set it up in your backyard and actually use it. Whether it's new or used, you always want to check for broken poles, rips, tears, leaks. Make sure you have enough stakes and cords, and it's a good idea to always consider buying a few extra stakes and a little bit of extra cord just in case. You want to set it up in your backyard, make sure that it works, and also check it for leaks. Even if you just set it outside in the backyard during a rainstorm, you don't have to be in it, you can always check it in the morning. Also, make sure things like the zippers work and everything like that. Now, I don't want to get in a hurry and set up my tent without making sure first that this is a suitable campsite. Yes, this is a good place to set my tent up, but is this a good location? Number one, you want to be on high level ground. Even though I'm next to a lake, the lake is probably about 2,000 foot that way. As romantic as camping by the lake sounds, wind and cold are going to be your enemies there. Wind can come up, you're going to be shivering, there's no shelter. It could even ruin your tent, blow it over, and make for a miserable night. So you want to get away from the shoreline or the bank of a river, because a river can rise up and the next thing you know, 2 o'clock in the morning, you're scrambling to get out of a flood. So make sure that you're on high level ground. A couple other things that you want to check for. Well, first off, I want to go back to the water. You want to be at least 200 to 300 feet away from your water, your lake or your river. Not necessarily a water source, but your lake or your river, to get away from those problems. Two other things you want to make sure of: that you have a place to store and prepare your food, another 200 or 300 feet away, as well as having a latrine, another 200 or 300 feet away. I've already scouted this place out, I'm fine, but if you're in the wild, you aren't going to have the ability to have a large group to keep animals away, especially if you're in bear country. So you're going to want to go 200 or 300 feet away to store and prepare your food. As handy as it may seem to say, well, I'll just throw my bear bag over that tree right there, that's simply inviting animals. You want to have your food storage as well as your food preparation 200 to 300 feet away. In some places of the country and even parts of the world, that is a requirement. You have to have your food and your food preparation storage 200 to 300 feet away, if not more. So keep that in mind. Yes, I know I've got a cut. Don't worry about it. I did that coming in to make the video. So make sure that you're 200 to 300 feet away from the water, either a lake or a river, 200 to 300 feet away from your food preparation and storage, as well as 200 to 300 feet away from any latrine that you're going to make. Yeah, I know, it's nice to have everything right here, but safety is paramount. Last thing you want to do is get up in the morning, start making your breakfast, and a bear ramble through your tent because it smelled your bacon. So before you do anything else, make sure that the site itself is suitable, not just where you're setting your tent. So now that we know that we've got a nice level spot, let's go ahead and verify that our spot is good enough for us. What we want to do is make sure that we're not in a low dale, in a depression, because cool air can settle down in here and turn it into a frigid refrigerator. And you don't want that. You want to have airflow. You want to have air movement. You also don't want to be down low because it might rain and the next thing you know, you're in a gully washer, you're in an arroyo that water's just rushing through, or simply pool up, and that's the last thing you want. So you want to be on high level ground, away from water, away from your food, and away from your latrine. So let's get started with prepping our tent site and show you what to look for when you do that. Now, before you actually start setting up your tent, you want to do some site preparation. You want to start making sure that you have things like sticks and rocks and anything else. There's a couple of walnuts here. I want to get things like that out of the ground. Now, this isn't going to be a landscaping project. You're not going to have something here that looks like it's on the cover of Better Homes and Gardens. You're just trying to get the ground level enough and flat enough and get rid of all the obstacles and debris that's on the ground, so it's not uncomfortable to sleep on. Also, if you see an impression where somebody had set a tent up there before, it may be tempting to set your tent up at the same spot because it's already been cleared out. However, you don't want to do that, especially in primitive sites. In wilderness sites, you want to preserve the ground as much as possible. So if you see the ghost or the imprint of where somebody has set their tent up, pick another site. You may have to do a little bit more work, but that way you preserve the pristine condition as much as possible. That's part of your responsibility for being out here, is to take care of nature. You want to leave this for people who come after you. So let's go ahead and get this site cleared up of all the debris, and then we can start setting up the tent. Now, understand that when you're out in a pristine wilderness, you're not going to have a nice, perfectly groomed campsite. You're going to have to put up with things like this. So try to avoid those. So once you get your site cleaned off as best as you can, and if it's going to be too much work, look for someplace else, because there's probably someplace else nearby that's going to be just as appropriate as this. It's just less work. So once you decide where you're going to pitch your tent and you've got the ground clean, a couple other things you want to look for, and I forgot to mention this, and that is you don't want to camp under dead or dying or loose limbs, trees, things like that, that can fall on you. Those are called widowmakers, and they can really put a cramp on your outdoor adventure if they fall on you and your tent. So make sure you watch out for that. Once you've got your site clean, orientation of the tent. Now, some people will simply orient their tent based on the view that they're going to have out of their door or window. That's fine if it's nice and calm like this, but if it's going to be windy or you're expecting storms, you're going to want to orient your tent according to the storm. So you're going to have to know which way the prevailing wind or which way the storm is going to come in from before you set up your tent. Now, some people will set up a backpacking tent with the narrowest end towards the prevailing wind. That's one method. My method is to put the sturdiest part of the tent towards the wind. Now, this is a Big Agnes Copper Spur UL2. It really doesn't have a strong end. It's got the same strength all through, so it really doesn't matter. So I will fall back on the narrowest point towards the prevailing wind. Once I've decided that, I can start going ahead and set up my tent. Now, I packed my tent with the rain fly first, and then the tent body, and then the ground cloth, or the footprint. That way, as I pull it out, it's basically in stage with my order of setting it up. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to orient my ground cloth. Now, most tents are tapered, so the ground cloth will be tapered just as well. As you can see, this part is narrower than the back part. Okay, so that is my foot. Now, I'm going to assume, or just say for the purpose of demonstration, that my prevailing wind is going to be coming from that way. So I'm going to throw my floor cloth or ground cloth out towards that prevailing wind. Now, pitching a tent in the wind is kind of difficult. It's an exercise in flying a kite. Fortunately, I don't have any wind here, so I can just go ahead and set this out. However, if you do have wind, you might have to use your truck poles or a log or a stick or other parts of your gear to hold this stuff down as you set it up. But I'm fortunate here that I don't have to worry about that. So now I'm going to get my tent out. Now again, just like the footprint, the tent is a little bit wider on one end than the other. The narrow end is going to be your foot box, so that's going to go this direction. So now I'm going to lay out my tent right on top of my footprint. Now, if it's windy out and the wind's wanting to take your tent away, you may have to get a couple of stakes out to stake your tent down, at least on the windward side, to keep it from blowing away. But I'm fortunate here, I don't have to worry about that. It's a nice calm day. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to setting up the poles. Now, when it comes to putting the poles together, you want to take it nice and slow and easy. You don't want to slam these things together. Yes, many tents are shock corded these days, and it's very easy to set them together. But I've seen people take the end of a cord and snap it like they're snapping a whip. And that's one of the worst things you can do for a set of tent poles, because that can damage them. And the last thing you want is a damaged tent pole, something that's bent or kinked, something like that. That's the last thing you want out in the backcountry, because, you know, the store isn't just a few minutes down the road. You're out here and you have to rely on yourself. So you want to make sure that you take it easy and be nice and gentle with your tent poles, because even though you may have a splice kit, you really don't want to employ that unless you really absolutely have to. Once you get the pole together, you can go ahead and lay it out and start erecting the tent. Now, how you erect your tent is going to be totally different from this unless you happen to have this tent. So this is why you want to go into your own backyard or someplace you know you can set the tent up, whether it's your basement or garage, a neighbor's house, a friend's house, a coworker's house. You know, if you live in a townhome or an apartment where you can't set up your tent and you don't have a backyard, find some place to set it up and be comfortable with it. Once you've got your tent erected, before you stake it down, if you haven't already, now is the time to decide, is this really where I want it? Do I want to move it? Do I want to turn it? And it's very easy to do. These tents are so light, you can just pick them up and move them. If you have your tent set up and you want to move it or turn it because it's not oriented to the wind correctly, you're not happy where it's set, but you've got it staked down because it's windy, there's generally enough give in the poles that you can do that. So let's say you want to go this way with it. I would simply pull this stake up, move it in, restake that, pull that stake out, and I can generally walk it to where I want it. However, for the purposes of this demonstration, we're going to say that right there is where we want it. So now we're going to make sure that our footprint or our ground cloth is where we want it. And we're going to go ahead and get it staked down. Now, when you stake it down, you want to pull things tight. You don't want to just push it through where that loop just happens to be. You want to pull it tight. Make sure that you've got as much tension as you can. And set your stake. And for the last stake, I'm going to pull tight and set that stake. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to position that floor cloth or ground cloth as best I can. Now, I'm not going to put the rain fly on for this demonstration simply because it's so nice of a day and I don't expect any rain while I'm finishing up this video, so I'm just going to leave the rain fly off. We're talking more about how to orient and place your tent, not make it weatherproof. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave the rain fly off. There are going to be 3 W's that you have to worry about when you set up your tent in the backcountry: wind, water, and wildlife. So to begin with, of course, we've already oriented our tent with the prevailing wind in mind. However, that's only if you're expecting a strong gust of wind, a huge surge, or a strong storm front coming through. If it's just a nice, soft, gentle breeze like what we're having here, if any breeze at all, if it's going to be hot, you want to put your door towards that prevailing wind. So I'd want to turn this 90 degrees. If it's going to be cold, you want to put your door away from the prevailing wind. You want to have that door downwind. Again, avoid camping near dead, dying, decaying trees, leaning trees, branches, things like that, so you don't have something fall on your tent and ruin it. Water-related issues, we've already covered. You want to seek high, dry ground. You're going to have less moisture in the ground that can seep up through your floor footprint and through your floor. You're going to have less condensation in the tent when you're in it, especially with the rainfly. And of course, trees are going to help because that creates a small microclimate to keep the moisture and humidity down. Avoid camping in low areas because obviously you don't want to get into a place where uphill, you don't want that water rushing down right through your campsite. And another reason to orient your door, if possible, downwind during a storm is to prevent rain from blowing into the tent while you're getting in and out of it. The third W is animals. Don't pitch your tent right next to a trail, whether it's the trail you came in on or any animal trails. So as you're scouting out your spot, make sure there aren't any animal trails nearby, because if they're on those trails, they're going to smell the scent of your food and you and come to investigate. Again, make sure that you have a location 200 to 300 feet away from water, 200 to 300 feet away from your latrine, and 200 to 300 feet away from where you're going to do your food storage and prep. And finally, don't keep any food in your tent. That's the last thing you want to do, is have a bear come up to your tent in the middle of the night looking for your Snickers bar. So don't keep anything in your tent that can be considered food. Like I said before, make sure that everything functions, everything is included. If your tent needs 6 stakes to set it up, and it comes with 6 stakes, you might want to consider getting a couple more, as well as 50 or 100 foot of paracord or some other cordage. So if it's going to be rainy, you can use those stakes and cordage to further sturdy your tent against a strong wind. Yes, you may have a good tent, but in a really strong wind, augmenting it is just going to help you feel better when that wind is howling at night. You can go right back to sleep. Now, when it comes to staking down your tent, you're going to get the maximum holding power if you drive that stake straight down. A lot of people drive them at an angle, drive them straight down. That way you get the most amount of soil around that stake. But when you drive it at an angle, you get less soil. So if you drive it straight down, you get more soil, better holding power. If you can't drive them either by hand or with your foot, you can use a rock, or there are special stake hammers, but most people don't carry them in the backcountry. Or you can do like I do, and that is use the tang of a full tang survival hunting knife. So that's another tip that I'm just going to throw in here, is when you shop for a good camping knife, make sure you get a full tang, because if you have that full tang, you have a much sturdier knife, and you can use it for heavy duty things like driving stakes. Now, most of the places where I go camping, we have normal, ordinary soil where I can actually drive a stake pretty much by hand. However, if you're going to be in an area where you know or suspect there might be very loose soil, or you're going to be camping in the snow, I would suggest getting sand anchors or snow stakes, which are available at many reputable sporting goods stores, and they augment your tent with those items. Now, if I was going to have the rain fly on this, I would go ahead and put it on. However, I've got another video, you can watch it up here, on how I show you to simply semi-attach it, have it ready to go. It's already attached at 2 points. If it starts to rain, all you have to do is throw it over the tent, clip it down, and you're done with it. But when you've got everything all set up, you've got a happy campsite, you've got a good level site that's dry, it's going to stay dry, you've set your tent up against the wind, you're taking care of water issues, you're taking care of wildlife issues, because your latrine is over here, your food is over here, and the water is way over there. So you've got a nice comfortable tent set up for the night. So now it's time to move in and start enjoying your next home away from home. Now that we've got our tent set up properly and oriented for the weather and the water and the wildlife and the wind, with our latrine over here and our food storage and preparation over here, we can now move into our new home away from home and be comfortable and go to sleep knowing that there isn't anything more that we can do to get us through the night. And that's a nice feeling when your pillow or your head hits that pillow, is to know that you are ready for whatever comes your way. So Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share on my videos. This is Backpack Hack coming to you with this trail tip. Be safe out there, and I'll see you out on the trail.